Hello, it's Mrs. Gabriel. We're going to cover how energy flows through trophic levels, starting with primary productivity and the sun. The essential knowledge points are listed here. Look at what's in the box. The exam writers write questions using these knowledge points, and as long as you get comfortable with the statement and you can expand on it, you should do well on it. Okay, why don't you make sure you have the following information in your notes. Find where you have the information in the title that says here, photosynthesis captures energy and respiration releases energy. If you don't have that information, write it. Photosynthesis starts with the producers. Oh, why is my thing clicking? Starts with the producers, and the producer is the plant. The producer is also referred to as the autotroph. Remember that, auto, because it automatically makes its own food, and it produces its own energy. We will go through photosynthesis and respiration a bunch for the rest of this slideshow. The world as we know it cannot sustain life unless our producers, photosynthesizing in the most productive way, exist. Now, do you know what a plant can also be called? An autotroph or a producer. Good. If not, make sure you write it down and know the other terms and the definitions too. We're going to go over all of these. Okay, we have two pictures here. I need you to look carefully at the processes for photosynthesis. So I'm not going to read what a producer is and is able to do or cellular respiration, but I am going to show you. So we have the green box down here that shows you the equation for photosynthesis, which requires solar energy. And this side of an equation is called the reactant. This side of the equation is called the product. So we're going to look at the reactant side first, and we're going to apply something called the law of conservation of matter. So just hang with me. So with solar energy, it hits the leaf, and the leaf has captured 6 carbon dioxide molecules and 6 water molecules. H2O is water, carbon dioxide is CO2. So 6 of these. And then with the sunlight zapping the chloroplasts and a little work with the help of something called ATP, the plant produces the reactants on this side. We have 6 oxygen molecules here, and we have 1 glucose molecule. So respiration, all you have to remember is that is photosynthesis in the opposite direction, except instead of solar energy, it is producing energy, used for growth, metabolism, like the mouse getting bigger, being able to run, right, just using energy. So let's go back to this. Solar energy, 6 water molecules, 6 carbon dioxide molecules. That's what the plant needs in order to produce 1 glucose molecule and 6 oxygen molecules. Okay, so remember I said the law of conservation of matter. That's no matter can be created nor can it be destroyed. So if we have 6 water molecules, that actually translates to 6 with the coefficient, 2 with the subscript. That translates to 12 hydrogen atoms on this side of the equation. There's no other H's in here. So if 12 hydrogen atoms are over on this side, using the law of conservation of matter, there has to be 12 hydrogen atoms over on this side. And what do you know? We have 12 hydrogen atoms. Now the same goes for, let's pick oxygen in our water molecule. There's not 1 oxygen atom, there's 6 because there's 6 H2O molecules, so there's 6 oxygen atoms here. And then we have over here, we have 6 times 2, that's 12 oxygen atoms, plus these 6, which makes 18. So if we had 18 oxygen atoms on the product side, the reactant side, then we have to have 18 on this side. Now let's look over here. So the law of conservation of matter is showing that this truly does work. We have 6 oxygen atoms here, and we have 6 times 2, 12 oxygen atoms here, which gives us a total of 18 oxygen atoms on this side. And remember, respiration is just when this mouse is using, the arrows go into, using those 6 oxygen atoms and molecules, and 1 glucose molecule in order to grow, sweat, breathe, eat, move. That's energy, right? And a lot of heat lost, a whole lot of heat lost. And our 6 carbon dioxides and 6 water molecules. Law of conservation of matter. Okay, so I'm going to show you a picture here. I want you to look at that image. So we know that aerobic respiration requires the use of glucose and oxygen. Air means, using air. Aerobic, using oxygen, using oxygen. So here's a question. What's the purpose of using glucose and oxygen? I just told you it. It's the purposes for living, growing, reproducing, breathing, right? What else is a product of respiration? Yes, for every 1 glucose and 6 oxygens combined, we get 6 water and 6 carbon dioxide molecules produced. And you know this. You breathe, you sweat, you pee a little all day. You also give off a little waste heat with your energy, your ATP from this process. Ta-da! That's how we live and grow and metabolize. Cellular respiration. And there it is again. Remember, photosynthesize would have been with sunlight moving in this direction. Photosynthesis uses carbon dioxide. Cellular respiration uses oxygen. And animals also respire. So plants respire too because plants grow. So they photosynthesize and they respire. Animals, no, we don't photosynthesize. You guys can't make your own food. And we'll get back to all of that later. So there's a little something I'm just going to throw in here about light. So plants photosynthesize with a chemical in the little green discs inside a plant cell, and it's called chlorophyll. It cannot make glucose and oxygen without sunlight. And this rainbow is really just energy emitted from the sun that the chlorophyll is trying to capture. It shows the sun's electromagnetic spectrum. You may have learned that in middle school. And the electromagnetic spectrum can actually be spread out in wavelengths. And you'll also learn more of that in physics. So this energy is emitted in different wavelengths, and the chlorophyll in plants needs light that is emitted from the red and blue parts of the electromagnetic spectrum. So in the ocean, like in this picture right here, or in a deep lake, red light from the electromagnetic spectrum and UV light and, of course, visible light, they don't penetrate very far. They only penetrate a few feet or meters in the water column. So photosynthetic organisms have adapted to live close to the surface, like phytoplankton, like little green plankton plants, okay? So plankton and other aquatic plants, and therefore anything that's, mostly photosynthesizing, has to live close to the surface. There are exceptions, though. Photosynthesizers that are adapted to living in a zone without that red light, so they get a little deeper down there. And that includes something like this picture here, which is red algae. So the red pigment reflects the red light while absorbing blue light. This blue light focus allows the algae to use limited sunlight available in photosynthesis. And this pigment also gives the seaweed a nice red coloration. And there's also some specialized organisms who don't photosynthesize. You need to know about them. They are chemosynthetic organisms. They make their own food just like plants, but they don't use sunlight because there isn't one that far, that deep down. They use hydrogen sulfide. And you can see how that equation kind of has a similar process and taste as, they make sugar right here, that glucose molecule, but they're using hydrogen sulfide instead of sunlight. And these are bacteria that do this. So chemosynthetic bacteria. All right, now what do you know about photosynthesis and respiration with producers? This is just one way that you can study. So you make diagrams out of all the information you know, and you compare it in the diagram. So in a minute, you're going to pause this, and you're going to interpret how to compare and contrast the graphic organizer, the way it's designed, and use your prior knowledge or notes or the textbook to guess what could fit in at least one box of each color. And notice that the middle column is what both processes have in common. So pause, and when you're ready, you can check. So how'd you do? This brown box only all these refer to photosynthesis, and they represent how photosynthesis is different or contrasts from the orange boxes, which represent only products of cellular respiration. And these yellow boxes in the middle compare by showing the similarities between both processes. Okay, we're going to move on to trophic levels, food chains, and food webs. It's okay. Okay, so now we're looking at trophic levels and food chains and food webs. So here are some of your essential knowledge points that you would need to know for College Board for the exam. And all, there's a producer growing, which is our autotrophic organism. And remember, I'm trying to use all those big words for you. So it all begins, our trophic levels and our food chains and food webs, they all begin with these guys, with the producers. As we just learned, they produce their own food. So they are autotrophs, they make their own. The source of all their energy is the what? The sun. But their energy is just used to help them grow. So plants or producers feed everything else in the world. They're the foundation of all food chains. Now, energy and matter move through trophic levels, and these are different levels. So we're going to expand on that a little more. We're going to practice following the terrestrial food chain. Remember, terrestrial means land. So just kind of listen, because this is all going to be common sense, but I'm using the big words over here in my explanation. So practice by listening first. The grasses are at the bottom of the food chain. Grass is a producer. It produces its own food. It's consumed by an herbivore. That vegetable-eating consumer is the zebra. The lion is a carnivore. That lion in this food web or food chain is a secondary consumer. The lion is not eaten by any other predator in this system either, so it's something that we refer to as the apex predator. Now pause and try to explain all these terms just like I did, but practice it on the aquatic food chain on the right. All right, species in the real world are rarely consumed in just this simple one-directional chain like we just saw. That's not very real life, and that's what's in a lot of textbooks. Energy and matter are actually much more complex, such as this model food web here. And this model really shows how species in an ecosystem are connected to one another. So some organisms also eat at more than one trophic level. So can you find one in this diagram? So one that I'm going to point out is the hyena. It eats at more than one trophic level because it eats plants and acts as a secondary consumer, right? So does a grizzly bear. It eats berries and it eats fish. And what else does the hyena eat? Yeah, it's a detritivore. So what's an example of a detritivore in this chart? Because I'm sure you're not very familiar with them. A detritivore, use the legend, work your way from the legend to find the matching colors. So hopefully you noticed that something called a dung beetle is a detritivore. What does a detritivore do? Now look, I typed it out for you just in case you forgot. It's very similar to a scavenger, but it really breaks down that tissue into very, very small particles and kind of gets it ready for bacteria. It even breaks down poop. That's why it's called a dung, because poop is also called dung poop. It's a dung beetle. Now, you need to know how to represent flows of energy and flows of matter, and you need to know how to explain the representations that you see. So you have to be able to refer this to what you just learned in the last set of videos on the carbon, nitrogen, hydrologic cycles, phosphorus cycle, sulfur cycle. So start trying to put all that together in your head while you're watching the flow of energy and food as well as that matter that we previously studied. Remember, energy is food. Food and energy flow into the belly of the consumer. So wherever the arrow goes is the direction of the flow. So this wildebeest is going to be eaten by, let's say, the vulture. So it's going into the arrow, goes into the belly of the vulture. Remember that direction. Now, the APES exam is based on a new course, and this will be the first year of the new course being tested in May. And these are some of the major concepts, and you'll get a lot of them, that you should be able to elaborate on with the facts and advanced technical vocabulary. So can you? I want you to pause, and I want you to read and test yourself by elaborating on this. Explain more about each of these bullets. Make sure you really use your notes in your text to confirm that. So food web is just a flow of energy and nutrients into two or more food chains. And what happens to the food web if we remove or add a new character, like an invasive species that takes over one, crowds out its space and competes with it? Or something comes into the environment that just eats all of something. What happens to the food web if we remove the kangaroo rat maybe due to a disease. So that's really important that we understand the food web so we can understand how it could crash and how to take care of all the animals and plants. And here's another example of how matter and energy are transferred through food webs and through biogeochemical cycles. We're specifically looking here at a desert food web. So how many trophic levels are in this diagram? You should have said 4. Try to follow the flow of energy and matter through all 4 levels. Get to know a desert food web. Pause if you have to. And notice that I really made sure that you had something that reminds you of how nutrients transfer through the levels. So you're looking at nutrients, but you're also just following the flow of energy going into the belly of the consumers. So remember, energy is in a constant one direction flow, and it starts with the sun. And that's through food webs, and then it goes back into the atmosphere and space. But nutrients, they have to be cycled and recycled. That's not one direction. That is not one direction. That's cycling. Now remember that a food web is a model of an interlocking pattern of food chains. A food web depicts the flow of energy and nutrients in two or more food chains. And on the left is one directional flow of energy of 2 food chains. And then here is a more complex food web. So positive and negative feedback loops can each play a role in food webs. So biologists, and this really happens in their careers, they often draw out the food webs from all the animals and plants that they can find in an ecosystem. And they're trying to map and figure out, how energy flows through the system, maybe how much biomass is in the system. But if there's an invasive or if there's an animal that's endangered, they need to know the details of the food web in order to protect the ecosystem and come up with management decisions in order to help protect it. So if one species is removed or added to a food web, the rest of the food web does get affected, as we've talked about. All right, I thought this slide would help you with understanding detritivores over decomposers, because I think these are new terms for you. So if you look on the left, crabs, mites, earthworms, snails, slugs, they eat the smaller dead stuff, and they eat poop and they eat dung too. They are detritivores. And then on the right, the decomposers, they finally do the final chemical breakdown. So they're no longer just chomping away at it. They're chemically breaking down that dead stuff, so it gets recycled back into the ecosystem. So that's cycling of our nutrients. These 2 trophic players are so incredibly important to recycling matter and energy back into the ecosystems, so it doesn't just disappear. All right, now this should be very new to you. We're going to look at how we compare the productivity by producers in an ecosystem, and we compare them with numbers, with math. So you're going to do a lot of pausing here. You really need to understand GPP and MPP. So you're going to look at the definitions, which term will be measuring amounts of solar energy, and gross primary productivity, and it's all about solar energy, okay? It's how we measure solar energy. So just take your time with this, pause and repeat as needed. I want you to actually pause and probably look at it, and then when you're ready, listen to me talk about it and confirm what you think you know. Okay, we're going to start by looking at the sun. So I want you to start over here and just kind of follow along with me. So producers, that's our plants, typically capture only 1% of all the solar energy that touches their leaf. So 99 plus 1% right over here. That's 100, right? 100% of all the energy that beats down on a leaf, 99% of that is reflected or passes right through, and it's not used by those chloroplasts. The other 1% actually is captured by those chloroplasts, and it's used for photosynthesis, and that's gross primary productivity. You following this? Now, out of that 1%, let's break it down further, 60% is used of just that 1% captured, 60% of it is used for respiration. The other 40% of what's in this 1% is used for supporting growth and reproduction. And that is what we call NPP, or net primary productivity. Now up here, I've given you some hints to help you remember. Tip to remember, the G in GPP means glucose is produced. And here's another tip, like the N in NPP means now I will eat new biomass, because this is the part that makes the plant grow bigger. So when we start applying math to these concepts, remember that NPP, that's this part right here, is equal to GPP minus respiration. That's this minus this. This minus this. So this is these two together. GPP is NPP plus respiration. But both of these is GPP minus the other. Okay, so just remember that. I know it's a lot to take in. You'll get there, I promise. We're going to practice. We're going to actually use this concept of measuring productivity with a real-life problem. So on any paper, try and calculate this. And it can be in a margin, whatever. I want you to pause, calculate, and then when you're ready, we're going to go over this. And remember to calculate for NPP. You can subtract respiration from GPP. So go ahead and calculate. All right, to calculate for GPP, gross primary productivity, you needed to have NPP and respiration, right? So you should have gotten 3.8, but that's not enough. 3.8 what? We can't ever report things mathematically with just a number and no units. So this, we actually talked about a while ago, but we're going to go over it again. We measure gross primary productivity and net primary productivity in kilograms of carbon per square meter per year. You need to understand that. This picture is showing you a square meter. It shows a square meter of dirt, but it's a square meter. So if I dug out the grass that was there, if I just dug out all the grass that was there, and I weighed it, like the grass that grew in a year, let's say I take all the grass from in this square meter that grew there for a year, never mowed it, that's important, and I weighed that. That's what's going to give me my kilograms. And the grass itself is the carbon. And the square meter is this area. And I said over the course of the year, what grew over the year. So that's how we measure biomass, and that's how we measure NPP and GPP. We measure growth by weighing it in kilograms in this situation. Sometimes it's a slightly different unit, just metrically. So plants are mostly carbon. Get it? All right, how much grass has grown on this field? I want you to pause and calculate. Okay, so it's 1, but it's not just 1. It's 1 kilogram of carbon per square meter per year. So this means that the grass living in 1 square meter of this field added 1 kilogram of carbon to the grass tissue every year by means of growth and reproduction. So in this example, NPP is 40% of GPP. All right, by measuring NPP in different ecosystems, we can start comparing them, and we can compare their productivity. So turn and discuss with your pretend study buddy or someone next to you. What is the most productive continental ecosystem that you see in this chart? Pause if you need more time. So the answer is swamps and marshes. Now I asked you about most productive continental, not most productive overall. So it was swamps and marshes. Now look at the rest of the continental ecosystems. You really need to start paying attention to these things. So swamps and marshes are the most productive in grams of carbon per square meter per year, but tropical rainforests are not far behind. And then look where these other biomes fit compared to swamps and marshes. So that's when that value of 2,500 grams of carbon per square meters per year doesn't mean as much as if we compare that value to, oh, well, here's something that looks like it's about half that. So the temperate rainforest only produces half of what a marsh produces. And that's when you start studying and remembering things. And then if you look all the way down here, like the tundra, my goodness, the tundra is not even half of a temperate grassland. And then look at the ocean, the marine ecosystems as well for their productivity. And this is in square meter. If we were just looking at, the open ocean, not in square meters, it would be significantly more. Okay. So abiotic factors that encourage plant growth or productivity. I just showed you two, sunlight and water. What else that's abiotic, affects growth and productivity of the plants in an ecosystem? Gave you two. Pause when you're ready. Humidity, nutrients, and warmer temperatures. Okay. Now remember, every once in a while, I'm just going to throw these AP facts out, and these are just like small pictures, and you're supposed to understand what they mean and be able to expand on them. So you go ahead and pause and read them and test yourself to see by looking at your notes, looking at a textbook, look it up on Google if you have to, be able to explain and expand and elaborate on them. So that was it for trophic levels. Now we're going to go on to some fancier stuff, and that's the 10% rule. Actually, we are still in trophic levels, but we're going to specify on the 10% rule. Now, before I go into it, before we go on to the details of it and looking at pictures, we have to know a little bit about the pyramids, okay? So some of these terms probably look familiar, but just in case, we need to make sure that we know. So what do you think the difference is between a standing crop and productivity? The standing crop, right here, the standing crop is the amount of energy in a system at one time, right? In one particular point in time. And productivity is more like a rate of energy over a span, which we were talking about with like per year, square meters per year, right? So a slow growing forest might have low productivity because the trees might grow really slow, but the standing crop of all those old and big trees is enormous. So they have a whole lot of biomass, but it's not super fast in productivity. So the amount of biomass could be enormous, and this is biomass that may have accumulated over hundreds of years. Now, algae in the ocean might be super productive, but the fish eat it very, very rapidly. So the standing crop for algae might not be very high. It's low. The image here shows a trophic pyramid for the Serengeti ecosystem. The biomass of producers is greater here than the biomass of the primary consumers for like where the producers serve as food. So the biomass of primary consumers is much greater than the biomass of secondary consumers. You see that? The 10,000 joules, it's much greater. It's not like this perfectly little shaped pyramid. It's much greater, much more energy. Joules is energy, much greater than this. So the proportion of consumed energy that can be passed from one trophic level, from the producer level to the primary consumer level, is we're going to average 10%. Now, it actually could be, these could be different organisms, and it could be anywhere between 5 and 20%. So 10,000 joules starts down here, and then when we ecologically, only 10% of that energy is transferred to the next level. That's what that means. So, and this is it's a general rule, and it's called the 10% rule. Although, remember, it can be around, 5 or 20. So that is part of ecological efficiency. And ecological efficiency is this proportion I was talking about of consumed energy that gets passed from one level to the next. And notice, this original 10,000 joules only turns into 10% of the 10% of energy once it gets to this level, to that trophic level. So joules, as I said, are a unit of energy. Just to help you kind of understand, 4,100 joules is 1 kilocalorie, which is around like a half a pea. And you can pause and read all this stuff to yourself. So we're looking at the flow of energy. You're thinking of energy. So if 10,000 joules of energy are available at this level, and then only 1,000 joules are eaten here at this next level for growth and reproduction, then most of it is eaten, but it's not digested. It's just excreted. So it's used for moving and breathing and for power. It's mostly lost to heat. So the zebra ingested 10,000 joules of energy, but was growing, metabolizing, breathing, moving, respiring, and the only energy left for this level is 10% of what he ate. So the 1,000 joules is all that's left for growth and reproduction. That is ecological efficiency. All right, now look at the big diagram. The caterpillar eats plant material. So caterpillar ate plant material, 200 joules worth of plant material. Half of it is excreted as feces. Feces is poop, right? So out of the 200 joules, we have these numbers right here, add up to the 200. So right now I'm talking about the feces, that's what's excreted. That's 100 joules of energy just gone in the poop, right? 67 joules of that original 200 that was eaten are respired. So we also don't see that, okay? It's like lost, it's like other things. And this leaves 33 joules left for growth. So 33 out of the 200 gives us an ecological efficiency of about 17%. So in this case, the energy efficiency was above that 10%, but it's part of that average. So it's 17% from the producer level to the primary level. Get it? Now let's apply that to the energy pyramid. The reason it's shaped like a pyramid is because so much more energy is available at this level always for all ecosystems than the next trophic level. There's always going to be more energy down here than there will ever be in the level above it. Always, always. All right, now try to make sense out of energy flow through trophic levels by calculating the energy that moves to the next level if the grass provides 100,000 calories to a family of rabbits. So you're calculating what is conserved and not lost to heat. So the biomass that gets to move to the next level. So the 10% rule, remember, is an average. You're going to calculate what the ecological efficiency is in this flow of food. So the rabbit eats 100,000 calories, the rabbits, and if the rabbits are 12% efficient in energy conservation available for the next trophic level, how many kilocalories does that translate to? I want you to pause and try to calculate, and then you'll check your answer. It's really easy. And here we go. How'd you do? If you don't know how I calculated this after looking at the answers, please ask me later. Now that you have learned about how much energy is used for growth through each trophic level, which is the most efficient way for humans to eat? Well, it's to be a vegetarian. If you eat a cow that eats grain, like corn, what percent of that original energy are you getting? You're only getting 1%. So you're actually getting 10% of the 10%. That's 1%. So you are saving the earth and saving lots of loss. You're not losing as much energy through the food chain, through the ecosystem, if you just eat more vegetables and less meat. Okay, I'll let you do this and pause. And there's the answer for you because I just explained all this to you, so I'm not going to explain it again, but hopefully now you just understood the math to apply it. All right, so let's put it all together. Energy moving from one level to the next usually translates closely to this amount of biomass at each level. This is why you will never see as many secondary consumers, these guys here, you will never see as many of them as you do in any of the levels below them. So remember, it's a rule of about 10% moving from level to level. All right, so you're going to pause and play in order to read the AP course and exam goals. See if you understand each of the statements. Look at the language that's used in them. You're going to get comfortable with them, add things to your notes, use your notes to see if you can add more information. Use Google, use your textbook, and then if you're still confused, use me. Ask me questions. So these are the main essential knowledge points that you are going to be tested on. And you should just practice reading them to remind yourself what they mean. And hopefully you can look at them now and they make more sense. We're moving on. Make sure you pause to read them. These should all make a lot more sense now, I hope. I bet you're actually feeling pretty good about yourself. Like You've just learned a whole lot of knowledge. So that's it for productivity and trophic levels in food webs. Make sure you write questions down and use your textbook to explain it. And if that doesn't help, ask me to clarify anything that you don't understand. This is Mrs. Gabriel signing out.